Good morning. Good morning. I don't know about you. It's January the 3rd already, but I'm still having to look at my phone for the date. And it's, by the way, not because I've forgotten. So I want to make sure. I really want to make sure that 2020 is actually over. See, if you've known me for a while, you know I grew up on horror movies, and at the end of the horror movie, just when they all think that they're safe, the monster, comes back for one last, So I have to be sure. I got to be sure it's really over. But today is a really special day. Not only is it the first Sunday of a whole new year, and by the way, I'm really grateful that I can spend that with you, my church family away from home. Today is also Epiphany Sunday. It's the kickoff of the Epiphany season, which bridges the gap between Advent, the build-up for Christmas, and also Lent, the build-up to Easter. So I want to thank you so much for being here today, whether you're here or also out there in Facebook land. Thank you so much for letting me be with you guys today, and thank you so much for being here. Now, Epiphany, of course, as a season, covers a lot of different incredible moments in Jesus' life. But today, we specifically commemorate the journey of the wise men. And the Old Testament verse that we have for this particular Epiphany Sunday could not possibly be better. I want to go back to Isaiah chapter 60, just the first couple of verses. Now, I read from the ESV, the English Standard. That's just my preferred version, and there's a slight difference between my version and the version that we read in our reading, and I want to see if you catch it. It says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the people. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you." I love that distinction. Darkness across the earth, but a thick darkness over the people. I really like that distinction, but I also like the distinction between this version and the version we read together, which says a deep darkness. They both basically mean the same thing, but they kind of paint two different pictures. When I hear of the darkness being deep, when I think about depths, I feel like it's a sinking. I imagine myself deep in a well or at the bottom of the ocean trying to claw my way back up. I imagine that feeling of drowning in the darkness. But then the idea of a thick darkness covering me, this big, heavy lacquer just weighing me down, it paints two different pictures. But I really like that distinction. Now, let me ask you a question. Have any of you maybe felt like it's been a little thick lately? Any of you? Well, the good news is that in the thickness, God gives us a gift. He gives us the Bethlehem star, the star of Christmas. He gives us his light. And we had a very special treat this Christmas because we had the star of Christmas. Did any of you guys go out and look at the Christmas star? It's funny because I had actually forgotten about it. And I wanted to go out and see it. And I didn't know where I was actually supposed to look. So I decided to make life easy. I went outside and I just looked for the brightest spot I could find. And when we are in the thick of it, when we are down in the depths, sometimes the only thing that we can do is to look for that bright spot and chase it. To look for the bright spot and chase it. And in fact, that is the very reason why God gave us stars to begin with. Look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. This is the 14th verse of the entire Bible, and it says, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years." God gave us stars to guide us. And of course, a lot of you living in the Keys already know that. Just ask any sailor. It reminds me of my favorite line from the poem Sea Fever by John Masefield. And it kind of reminds me of how I feel every time I start longing to visit the Keys. It says, I must down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and sky. And all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by. By what star will you steer into 2021? Now, I've been coming down here and talking to you for about 13 years, and I often come in this area between Christmas and New Year's. And in my time of coming down, I've actually preached a lot of Epiphany services with you. And because I've talked about Epiphany so many times, I really wanted to just dig into Scripture, because one of the things about Scripture, especially stories like Easter and Christmas, is sometimes we read certain verses so many times that they become so familiar and they start to lose a certain power. Certain details start to kind of fade into the background and stop kind of popping at us, and we need to revisit them with fresh eyes. So I really wanted to dig into this verse and really search it, and as I did, something popped out at me that I never really thought about before. I want to see if you catch it too. Right in the beginning of Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, again, I'm reading from the ESV version. It says, Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. I find that curious. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand why Herod would be troubled. Herod is the appointed king. He's sent there by Caesar. He is the king. He is, for all intents and purposes, the legal king of the Jews. And suddenly people are coming and saying, well, the real king of the Jews has been born, and we want to come and worship him. If I was Herod, I'd be pretty disturbed too. But why was all of Jerusalem disturbed with him? Jerusalem is God's holy city. It is the center of Jewish life and culture. It is where the temple is. It is where all the chief priests are. It's where all of God's chosen people are living. Why are they troubled? Why are the children of God living in Jerusalem not rejoicing? Our king has been born. Where? We got to find him. I got to see him. Why were they troubled? Well, one obvious idea is if they know that Herod's been appointed the king, that maybe they were troubled because they're afraid of what he's going to do, in retaliation. That's very likely. But I do have two other hypotheses. I have two theories. I got two theories. And the first theory is, I wonder if part of why they were troubled was because of the messengers. Oh dear, what did I just do? I touched something. Hold on. I'm going to stand perfectly still. Okay, we're good. The messengers. So now we have to go back and really figure out who were these wise men. And, hold on. Gotta be still. I can do this. It's easy to preach when you don't move, right? I know I never move when I'm preaching. So who were the wise men? Well, the fact of the matter is that we don't really know a whole lot about them. I know that we sing the song, We Three Kings, and when we have our beautiful nativity, we have this wonderful image of three kings coming with their three gifts. And believe it or not, church tradition, and your microphone is here.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. We good now?
I have been having a lot of beans since I've been here because it's New Year's and it's good luck.
Those are black eyed peas.
And the black eyed peas too. Well, I had beans over at Sheila's house though. So, we have three kings, and believe it or not only just, what did I just do? What is this? I don't know. I'm breaking everything. You're never going to let me back here. So, we have the kings. And then church tradition goes even further. Not only do we imagine that they're kings, we even gave them names. Does anybody know the names of the three kings? How about you guys at home in Facebook land? Type it in the comments if you know it. Do any of you know the names that we've given the three kings? Balthazar, Gaspar, and Melchior. This is based on nothing. This is kind of like fan fiction, kind of, that we just all kind of agreed to have every year. And the truth is that we know next to nothing about these men. We have no idea even how many of them there were. But because they brought three gifts, we associate three gifts with three people. It just becomes easy shorthand for art and pageantry. To the best of our recollection, these individuals were more than likely the chief priests of a Persian religion, because they probably came from Persia, and that religion was called Zoroastrianism. And these were not Jewish individuals. These were actually astrologers. These were stargazers. These were individuals whose entire focus was watching the heavens and looking at the stars. And they made so many incredible breakthroughs in star charting and all this that their work actually became a lot of the foundation for actual astronomy, the science of studying the stars that we go back to. They were world famous for their stargazing, and that's chances are who these individuals were. These were astrologers from Persia who were part of the Zoroastrian religion, who saw the star and came and worshipped. And the word that we have for them in the original Greek is Magi. And Magi, we see that word later in the New Testament in reference to Simon Magus, and Simon Magus was the magician who was a heretic traveling with Paul. So that's where we get the word magician from. So here the wise men were really just stargazing magicians. And I want you to think about this. Imagine you're living in Jerusalem. Imagine that you are a good, God-fearing Jewish person, and then suddenly some outsiders, some, for your perspective, heretics, people who are not part of your faith, these foreign outsiders come into your land, they come into your holy city, and then they tell you that your God is showing them where your king has been born, and you need to listen to them. Who are these people? Who do they think they are? Now, one of the things that Kerry says often in his sermons that I love is that the people in the Bible are a lot like us, and we are... Exactly. And you know, Tiffany, you trying to get my attention?
Texted me saying we missed learning the answer to why was all the Jerusalem worried because of sound. Jason, can you tell me that?
Okay, well, you know what? The good news is that you actually have not missed a whole lot, because I'm only right now in the process of answering it. So you haven't missed a whole lot. So what I said was, my point being that if all of Jerusalem is God's holy city, why on earth are they going to be troubled? Well, one idea would be that because they know Herod's the king and they're afraid of what he might do to them. But now where we are is that I'm suggesting that one of two possibilities is that they didn't like hearing it because of where it was coming from, that they didn't like the messenger. So now I've been explaining who the wise men were, that the wise men were Magi, and that the Magi were Zoroastrian astrologers from Persia, and to the best of our recollection, that's probably who they were. So they didn't like hearing it from the messenger, because here's some outsiders coming in and telling them about their faith and their Messiah. And as I was saying, we're a lot like the people in the Bible. People in the Bible are a lot like us. And if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we can get a little bit maybe suspicious of outside sources that we're unfamiliar with. We might not always like to hear the news from messengers that we don't personally know. We tend to like to surround ourselves with sources that we know, that we trust, that we agree with, and more often than not, that agree with us. And that's fine, but the danger of that is that sometimes we end up risking missing out on incredible new things that God is trying to show us that we aren't seeing, because it's coming from an unexpected source or an unfamiliar place. And the funny thing about that is that Jesus himself even calls out the religious leaders later on. Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, these are the religious leaders. These are the religious elite of Jesus' day. The Pharisees and the Sadducees came, and to test him, Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, because the sky is red. And in the morning it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, Because remember, Genesis 14, God gave us all of these signs in the sky to help us to read seasons and weather and guide us. But you cannot interpret the signs of the times. In other words, you can see all this because you're looking for this, but you can't seem to see what God is doing right in front of you. And that brings me to my second theory. I think that all of Jerusalem was disturbed with Herod because deep down, a lot of them didn't really want him to come, because his arrival would upset the status quo. And if there's one thing that a lot of us can relate to, is that it can be really easy for us to settle for less. It can be easy for us to settle for things that aren't best for us. It can be easy for us to settle for things that are downright bad for us if they are familiar and if they are predictable. Because that familiar unpleasantness is less scary than something new and unknown. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I don't know about you, but I made a lot of plans for 2020. And in fact, I actually made them right here. Whenever I come down to the Keys, one of my favorite rituals is I always go out to the beach park behind the library in Isla Mirada. It's one of my favorite spots down here, and I will often go there, and I'll do sermon preparation, and I'll just ruminate and take in the nature, and I'll write or draw or whatever I'll do to kind of wind down. And last year, I came and preached the service that was the week after Christmas, so it wasn't quite New Year yet, so I went to the beach park and I started to vision for 2020, and I made all of my plans. And as a writer and an author, I looked to all of my past successes to try to budget for future successes. I thought to myself, well, let's see, this year I had done 8 monster gospel shows and 12 Christmas shows, so I can expect to maybe try to do this much this year. And I had so many book signings in stores and libraries here, so I'm going to try to budget for that. And if I can do that, then I can guess this is probably how many books I'm going to sell. And I had all these great plans and goals, and we all know what happened. And that was just in my professional life. In my personal life, I had planned a vacation. It was going to be the very first vacation I had been on in 13 years that was not in some way for business or ministry. It was just to go someplace and enjoy things and have fun. And I was supposed to leave the very week that the stay-at-home orders came in place, so no going away for that. In September, I was supposed to go to France to see one of my oldest and best friends get married. And, that was going to be my first time out of the country. And I was so excited. I had a layover in Madrid and a layover in London. And I was so excited for that. All that out the window. At my church, where I was, as a youth pastor, I preached a sermon series from my youth group that is probably the same sermon that a lot of youth pastors with terrible senses of humor preached. And it was called Vision 2020. It was all about the goals we were going to set as a youth group for the year and all the things that we were going to do. And guess what? Not only did we not do any of those things, my church didn't make it. We closed back in June. Not only did we not accomplish any of the things that we set out to do as a youth group, I'm not even a youth pastor anymore. Really, the sermon should be called Hindsight 2020. But the fact of the matter is, I bet my entire year on what was safe and predictable. I rolled the dice, and they came up snake eyes. What star, by what star will you steer into 2021? Will it be your cleverness, past accomplishments, your best guess? All of those things can only carry us so far compared to the guiding light of Jesus Christ and the star that He wants us to steer by. Now, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I had a wonderful experience yesterday. I just have to share with you. And, for me, it wouldn't be a complete Keys trip if I didn't spend some time on a boat, although I've had a lot of Keys trips where I didn't. But still, full the Keys experience, I want to be on a boat at some point. And yesterday, I got to be on a boat, but the difference was I was on a boat, but I wasn't actually on the water. You see, this boat was the replica of the Pilar, Ernest Hemingway's boat over at the Worldwide Sportsman Bass Shop over in Isla Mirada. 14 years I've been here preaching with you for 13 years, been coming down here for 14 years, and it's the first time I've ever been there. Didn't even know it was there. So I went there, and, again, coming from a background as an author, I was quite amazed. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Ernest Hemingway, but I have been coming here for 14 years, and I will catch up eventually. The point is, for me as a writer, it was a wonderful experience. Now, for those of you who haven't been there, the Pilar on display, it's not Ernest Hemingway's actual boat. It's a replica boat that was made from a sister ship, same make and model. It was manufactured a year before his actual boat was, but it's set up like his, and it's a sort of a nice sort of idea, a window into what it was like for him on the seas. And that was a very near and dear boat. That was for him as much a creative tool as his typewriter was, which they had on display there. Well, I'm sure it wasn't his actual typewriter, but it was a typewriter from that era. And I'm sitting below deck, and I'm just taking all of this in. I'm trying to imagine the creative flow of juices and all of that. And then these two kids come below deck, probably about 15 years old, couple of youth. These two boys could not have been more bored and just more disaffected. They could not have cared less. And they were with their mom, and the mom was above deck, and they come below deck, and they're looking, and they're just blowing off everything, and they just think it's all lame. They start to play with the typewriter, and they're imagining typing out obscenities. And one of them says, "This typewriter is the only cool thing in here." And they start to walk off, and I'm just kind of inwardly seething. And then they go above deck, and their mom is trying to explain to them the significance of this boat, and one of them says, "Whatever, it's just a boat." Here's the thing. As I said, that boat was very important to Ernest Hemingway. It's a very important part of his creative process. Really, sitting in that boat is almost like sitting in his brain. It's like sitting in his mind. It's a very significant thing. And my point is that there are probably a lot of really incredible things that God is wanting to show us. But when we go and start chasing other stars, we end up missing the boat. We have to be aware of what star we are steering by. Now, don't get me wrong. I know I've completely demystified the three kings, and that they weren't probably kings, and to be honest, we could have a whole conversation for another day about when they actually visited Jesus, whether they were actually at the manger or not, but that's a conversation for another time. We don't know how many of them there were. We don't know nothing about them. And even so, I still love the Nativity. I love the song, "We Three Kings." Maybe it's not factually accurate, but it still articulates deep spiritual, theological truth, and I love it, and I can't wait for us to listen to it after this sermon. I love all of those things, but I really love the Magi for who they actually were. Yeah, they were astrologers. Yeah, they were stargazers, but they were also individuals who were receptive to God's leading. They were individuals that were willing to look and to see what God was doing, to catch what God was doing, and they were the ones who were willing to follow it. And maybe that's why all of Jerusalem was troubled. These outsiders were making them look bad. Now, is that a tacit endorsement of astrology? Well, not quite. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 19 says, "Beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and moon and stars, all the host of heaven, that you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the people under the whole heaven." I really like that ending part. I like how in this verse what the Lord is saying is none of you get to worship the stars. God didn't give them to you. God gave these things to everybody. Everybody under heaven, God put these things in place for to guide us, not just you. Because here's the thing about worship, and we don't talk about this a lot, but worship is a kind of possessive thing. It's not enough that God is God. God is my God. God is the God of my father. God is the God of my house. God is the Lord of my life. I claim him as my God. He's my God. And God claims me as his child. But the stars don't belong to me. They don't belong to you. They belong to everybody. God hung them for all of us. And that's the message of the Magi. These stargazers who followed the star to worship Jesus were the first Gentile worshipers of Jesus Christ, the first non-Jewish people. These were individuals who recognized God's light and who followed it and who worshiped. And in the Magi, what we see is the bridging of the gap between the Jewish world and the Gentile world. Not a star for just the King of the Jews alone, but a star for all of God's creation, for us to come together and rally under. That's the power of Christmas. And what I love the most about the Christmas star that we saw back in last month was that spirit of unity. It amazed me that no matter what article I read, whether it was spiritual or scientific, it spoke of the spiritual significance of that star. I'm reading scientific articles on astronomy websites, and they're quoting Matthew, and they're talking about the wise men. They're talking about the journey of the Magi and what that represents. Here I am seeing secular sources talking about the spiritual truth. That's the power of the Christmas star to bring people together. And what I love about it is this star that we had in December wasn't a star at all. It was a conjunction. It was two different worlds coming together. And what is Christmas? What is the star of Christmas if not a conjunction? Jesus Christ, the conjunction of God and man. Christmas bridging the gap of creating peace between God and man, bringing the secular and the sacred together, bringing Jews and Gentiles together, bringing everybody all together. That's the power of the Christmas star. Worlds colliding. Now, the Christmas star in 2020 was not the only star that was special to me that year. I hope that we can agree that for as rough as 2020 was, there were good things to come of it. There were new insights, new things that we learned about ourselves, new things that we learned of ways to connect with other people, to do ministry in ways we've never done before, to be able to reach people all over the world. There were things that we can take and lessons that we can learn that are good and worth learning and worth adapting into our lives moving forward. However, if we're going to be honest, it was also a time of a lot of pain and grief and frustration and disappointment and loss. And one of the losses that I was grieving in 2020 was a young man by the name of Carl. Now, Carl was the son of a woman that my dad is very close with, and Carl found himself on some hard times. See, Carl had a lot of struggles, and one of his struggles was battling addiction. And his addiction was such that his girlfriend had kicked him out, threw him out of their house, and told him, until you get your life together, you're not seeing your son Leo again. And she even gave him a checklist of all the things he had to do if he wanted to see Leo again. And for all of Carl's struggles, he loved his son. Leo was the most important thing to him, and so he did the best he could. And here's the thing. My dad wanted to help him, and he wanted to be there for his friend, the mother. And so my father volunteered me to take Carl in and to stay with me at my house until he got on his feet. And I'm not going to brag about myself. I'm not going to boast about myself and say that I did some great thing. I didn't. The truth of the matter is I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't. I wanted no part of it. But it was the right thing to do. And so Carl came, and I even let him have my bedroom. I let him stay in my bedroom, and I stayed in my guest room. And you might think, oh, well, that was very nice. It meant the world to Carl. But even that was me being apprehensive, because everything I'd ever heard about Carl was that he was constantly robbing his mother and pawning off things for drug money, and all I heard were these bad stories. And so in my brain, well, there's nothing valuable in my bedroom. My den, my guest room has all my collectibles and all my valuable stuff in it. So in my brain, I was going to stay in there, put a lock on the door, and keep my stuff safe. That's where my head was. So there's no bragging for me here at all. But I did the best that I could to be a friend to him, to be a supportive presence. And you know what? When I actually met Carl, he was nothing like what I expected. He was a very kind, very buoyant, very jubilant, very happy-go-lucky person. And he was eager to jump in and to start doing things. And he was helping me around the house and doing everything he could to show his gratitude. Being able to give him a bedroom meant the world to him. It was the closest thing he had had to a room of his own in years. It meant so much. And one by one, he started to check off that list. He got the job, and he started to do all these things and start getting money saved so he can get an apartment for, him and them. And one by one, it was all looking great. He was living clean. But here's the thing. There's one thing that Carl didn't do. And the thing that Carl didn't do was reach out beyond himself for help. He wanted to conquer his addiction by his own willpower, by his own strength, by his own cleverness, rather than looking for actual help. Rather than finding a star to guide him, he was going to do it all on his own. And the fact of the matter is he couldn't. And eventually, slowly, it became very apparent that he was on pills again. I've been a youth pastor for a long, long time. I've been around the block a lot. I know what I'm looking at. I know what I'm looking for. No matter how much he denied it. And then toward the end of his time with me, he got really worse, where he became a very different person, a very cruel, very angry, very pushy person, a person who was looking around my house and telling me what money we could get for this, that, or the other thing if we went and pawned it off. And suddenly, I became afraid. Suddenly, that worst case scenario I was worrying about was happening before my eyes. But I didn't have to worry too long, unfortunately, because Carl went too far. And he accidentally overdosed. He died in my bedroom. He died in my bed. Because he wasn't willing to look for a star to guide him outside of himself. Tore my father apart. A level of pain and despair I never want to see in my father again. Tore his family apart. Tore everybody apart. So October rolls around, and October would have been Carl's birthday. And so my father decided that he wanted to do something special to remember Carl and to celebrate Carl. And so he went through one of those services that allows you to have a star named after someone. He had a star named after Carl, but not just any star. The one thing that kept Carl going day in, day out was his desire to see his son again. His son Leo, who he loved more than anyone on earth. And so the star that my father picked to name after Carl was a star in the heart of the constellation Leo, because Leo was always close to his heart. And now we can look up and we can see that star, and we can remember the light, we can remember the joy, we can remember the goodness. But we can also remember what happens when you find yourself not leaning on a star to guide you. And the star that God wants you to steer your life by, the Bethlehem star, it is a star that will lead you into the heart of God. And if we open ourselves up to that light, God will dwell in our heart also. Now maybe the Christmas star that we saw in December wasn't the actual Christmas star. Maybe it wasn't. I really want to hope that it was, though. I love the idea of the Christmas star being a conjunction. Two planets coming together at just the perfect time when Jesus was born, because it reminds me that God is the master of space and time. That no matter how dark it gets, no matter how thick it gets, no matter how deep it gets, in His perfect time, God brings everything all together. Going back to our scripture, Isaiah 60, going back to verses 1 and 2, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will arise upon you, and His glory will be seen upon you. 2020 is over. The darkness is passing. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Will you chase it? Will you chase that light? If you do, if you chase that bright spot, the glory of God will be seen on you so that you can help light others' way. All you have to do is rise and shine.